Astrology and Your Neighbors, created, directed, and presented by Reverend Dr. Dikki Jo Mullen. Have you ever had a neighbor that you really got along well with and they became like family? Or on the other side, a neighbor who is constantly a source of stress? In this video, Dr. Mullen will look at astrological aspects associated with our neighbors and how we might get along with them if we are presented with challenges.
This is astrologer and paranormal investigator Dr. Dikki Jo Mullen coming to you from downtown Orlando, Florida with some information and thoughts about astrology, neighbors, and the neighborhood. As a consulting astrologer, I often have complaints about neighbors, questions about when they're going to move away, questions about who is doing what to whom in the neighborhood. I have one lovely lady named Tabby who recently came in and wished that her neighbors would move to Siberia. And that sounds kind of funny, but her eyes were filled with tears and her voice was trembling. And this was a very, very big shock because this was usually a calm and very personable lady. And her speech is peppered with amusing quips most of the time, jokes, a smile. But during this consultation a few weeks ago, she said her whole life had been changed by a series of confrontations with neighbors. From the outside looking in, sometimes it's hard not to laugh at little incidents, but these can erupt into a full-blown feud. And most of us have had a neighbor someplace or other that's been less than neighborly. This time it all began with a parking dispute and then became inflamed when Tabby's cat bested the Johansson's cat in a feline squabble. And then out-and-out warfare developed when the Johanssons' 10-year-old daughter, mad about the cat, put a garden hose into the window of Tabby's young daughter and turned the water on. Any temptation, though, is squelched when you look at how this can affect people. On the evening news, there are often incidences of one neighbor shooting another one over something so minor as driveway access, silly little things, and this can affect whole populations and groups of people, with neighborhood situations becoming more complex. Apartments, condominiums, zero lot lines, suburban homes all generate clashes when people are jammed too close together. So what can you do when you're confronted with a difficult neighbor? This unhappy experience, aside from such common sense guidelines as not jumping to conclusions or overreacting, can help with a glance at the horoscope. The third house is the area of your birth chart which describes your neighbors overall throughout your life, and begin by considering the zodiac sign ruling the third house at birth and then any planets there for deeper insights. A good place to start, though, can begin with the familiar sun sign. That's the birth sign we all know, or the Earth's path around the sun. Aries. Your third house of neighbors is ruled by Mercury, and the sign of Gemini is there. Your neighbors might be talkative, filled with curiosity, nosy, and ask a lot of seemingly innocent questions, but then encourage gossip. Be careful about revealing confidential information. Whatever you do, don't talk to one neighbor about another. Mail delivery, transporting children to school, bicycle traffic, commuter travel, loud outdoor phone bells, and conversations can trigger complaints. One of your neighbors might be a teacher, elementary or secondary probably, or a media specialist. Taurus. Your neighbors are described by the moon and the sign of Cancer. There can be a number of multi-generation families, from infants to grandparents, even great-grandparents living nearby. Small children playing can get overly protective, nanas and mamas upset when the kiddies argue over games and toys. Children and the elderly can be the instigators of adult controversies. Ethnic group differences are likely to come into play. Relationships might improve if one takes time to understand the cultural traditions the neighbors have grown up with. Much pride can be taken in nice yards, furnishings, and decorations. Compliment your neighbors on their homes and children. Exchange some recipes if they've immigrated from another country or part of the world, and they can become your staunch allies. Taurus, one of your neighbors might be an historian or could work in the food and hospitality industries. Gemini, Leo and the Sun describe your section of neighbors. Great pride will be taken in image and reputation. Some of your neighbors might be snobs. Keeping up with the Joneses is an apt phrase. Get along well with your neighbors by letting them shine. Don't be overly competitive. Find out what they take pride in and offer an occasional word of praise and appreciation. The flamboyant Sun-Leo energies love a party. Try a neighborhood block party, barbecue, or maybe yard sale. And be tolerant if your neighbors have a noisy gathering. Invite them over if you're having a party of your own. One of them could work in the theater or in the tourism industry. Cancers, Virgo and Mercury rule your neighbors. Health and safety factors, as well as small animals, can come into play. Keep your animals under control. Don't let them bark or prowl where unwanted. Be tolerant of their pets, too. You might criticize neighbors too much or live near those who are fussy perfectionists. Be cautious about circulating petitions against them, voicing complaints to head off misunderstandings. It's good to live and let live and not be too overly fussy for those born under the sign of Cancer. One of your neighbors could work in healthcare or computer technology. Leo, your neighbor indicators for your solar third house are Libra and the planet Venus. You might socialize a great deal or perhaps belong to the same clubs and organizations. If single, there could be a romantic involvement. I had one client with Venus in her third house of neighbors who ended up marrying the guy across the street. And it all worked out. 20-some years later, they're still together as far as I know. Unless you're fortunate regarding neighbors, usually they will be well-mannered, artistically inclined, interested in beautifying the neighborhood with projects. Neighbors might offer advice to you about remodeling or landscaping your home. Take this with good grace, accept it graciously, then do what you want. But plant some pretty flowers and shrubs to hide the garbage containers. One of your neighbors could be a photographer or an attorney. Virgo, your neighbors are described by Scorpio and Pluto. There can be some difficult patterns here. This is one of the more difficult combinations for neighborhood peace. Vastly diverse lifestyles and values are present. Don't try to change your neighbors, but try to put yourself in their shoes. There can be some break-ins or legal infractions afoot, even in the nicest neighborhoods, if you have the Virgo tie to neighbors. If you dislike someone, use care. All is not as it seems. Accidents or wicked weather or other adversities have a way of drawing your neighborhood closer together and being a blessing in disguise. Encourage better communication and camaraderie. Look for ways to resolve apparent problems to spark some goodwill. Your neighbors will be secretive. You might not ever know exactly who they are and what they're doing. Espionage, a spy, undercover police officer, maybe. Look carefully and see what you can see. Libra, your neighbor indicators are Jupiter and the sign of Sagittarius in your third house. And managing wild or stray animals can be an issue here. Linked to pets, there can be some sensitive issues. Larger dogs, horses, goats, or exotic, unusual animals can be a part of neighborhood dynamics. Folks can be blunt, tactless, try not to get offended too easily. Athletic events can be popular. One client with this configuration in her horoscope lives on a street which is always being closed off to let thousands of marathon runners go by. This has created a lot of grief and anger. Very religious neighbors who are always inviting you to their churches can turn up. You might also find yourself residing near a school or church. Honesty and a liberal attitude will help you keep the peace. One of your neighbors could be a church pastor, an athlete, or an animal trainer. Scorpio, Capricorn and the planet Saturn describe your neighborhood situation. You might be forced to live near those who appear to be of a different socio-economic level. If you secretly see your neighbors as blue-collar rednecks, keep this observation to yourself. And the age gap can be a hurdle here. Older housing, cramped driveways, and tiny yards can pose situations to cope with. In a positive sense, historic preservation and preserving landmarks can connect the neighborhood in a constructive way. And there are always improvement projects afoot. Seek ways to keep the neighborhood quiet and safe. Neighbors can be retirees or maintenance workers. And let's ask Templeton to go down and talk to the neighbors instead of interfering with this. You know, cats roaming our neighborhood are a very big deal, and I think Templeton wanted me to mention that. And I had one neighbor who was letting his dog run loose, and it became a real problem a while back. He's moved away since, thank goodness. But I think Templeton wanted to share that anecdote, right? Oh, my goodness. Sagittarius, Uranus, and Aquarius are your astrological indicators. Very unusual, eccentric characters can be living around you. If that isn't the case, then conservative neighbors might view you as the odd one out and call you the neighborhood weirdo. Keep a sense of humor about this, and your neighbors can come across as friendly. You would do well to keep contact impersonal, though. If you're a Sagittarian or have Sagittarius rising, wait to get to know individual neighbors gradually, a little at a time. Just offer them a friendly wave from a distance. Neighbors around you can have a lot of gadgets like alarm bells, cameras, unusual lights, or holiday decorations operating. Some of them might try to organize a neighborhood watch or email exchange. There's a lot of coming and going. Your neighborhood changes. People can move in and out unexpectedly. There's never a dull moment in your neighborhood. One neighbor might be a ghost tracker, psychic, or even an astrologer. Capricorn, your neighbors are described by Neptune and Pisces. There can be at least one handicapped, disturbed, or depressed person nearby. Expect to be finding some barriers and figuring them out, and don't discount alcohol abuse as a factor. If you're complaining about an ornery neighbor to the authorities, be sure you're right in doing so first. And oh my goodness, Templeton, you're really concerned with looking at the horoscope there even. I don't know, he's certainly intrigued by neighbors. I think he wants the cats in the neighborhood to move away, right, Temp? Is that what you want? Well, continuing with Capricorn and your neighbors, they can be hypersensitive and easily upset. Good or bad, they're not as they first seem. A few kind gestures on your part can work wonders and offer help if someone seems to need it. Water rights, zoning regulations, and boundaries, the location of property lines, have to be resolved at some point. One of your neighbors might be a sailor, a mystic, or a beachcomber. Aquarius, you have Aries and Mars as your astrological indicators concerning neighbors. They might be especially proud of their motorcycles and race cars. There can be some issues about them racing up and down the street. Neighbors will be assertive. They won't hesitate to let you know if something's bugging them. And you might live near law enforcement, a military base, or military personnel. Someone wants to run the neighborhood. There's an unofficial struggle going on for neighborhood mayor. Assert yourself in a good-humored way. Anger can flare up and then die down quickly if you're patient. There might be someone who believes in carrying weapons to be aware of. If the neighborhood is a dangerous one and you are an Aquarian or have Aquarius rising, you want to be aware of firearms and control of other weapons. Usually a grudge isn't held, though. Leave a neighbor who's momentarily upset alone, and chances are all will be forgiven and forgotten. One of your neighbors could be a soldier or a mechanic. Pisces. Your neighbors are described by Taurus and Venus, and usually they will want to just be at peace and preserve the status quo in their routine activities and follow their own conservative values. If you're a newcomer, don't try to change things and try to fit into the picture amicably as it is. Some of your neighbors might be interested in real estate or landscaping. Maintaining a nice yard could endear you to them. Pisces, your neighbors might include bankers, musicians, or artists. They'll be impressed if you appear to be classy and affluent with a high income. Try to appreciate your neighbors. With Taurus ruling your third house, the same ones might be there forever. The bull tends to root in and hold on. Expect less coming and going if you move into a neighborhood and you have Taurus ruling your house of neighbors. That would put your sun in Pisces. Another neighbor could be a business owner. After considering the guidelines just mentioned, your solar third house, that's your birth sign, and the third sign after it, look to see the ascendant or rising sign, planets you have in your third house at birth, and then look at transits. Transits are where the planets are moving from day to day, week to week, month to month. It's how predictions are done in astrology. Mars going through the third house will usually last about 6 weeks or so. There can be some variation, and this can be a cycle of temporary tension in the neighborhood. Jupiter going through the third house will last about a year, and that can bring a helpful or gifted neighbor your way. An eclipse in your third house can show a shakeup in an established neighborhood, new neighbors, and also outer planets like Neptune and Pluto and Uranus can show deep transformation. Here in Florida, we have a problem with sinkholes and also construction projects or other upsets, changing neighborhoods and profoundly altering the landscape. This is Dikki Jo Mullen wishing you peace and happiness in the neighborhood.